Okay, Assalamu alaikum. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our PMI KSA webinar. My name is Dr. Hassan Tayyib, the Executive Director of the Western and Southern Region PMI KSA chapter. While we are excited to have you all with us, we would like to extend our special welcome to our guest of honor, Mr. Lee Lambert, the CEO of Lambert Consulting Group. Lee has logged 50 plus years of project management experience and is considered one of the world's thought leader in project management methods and how they can be utilized to create and sustain value-added leadership and collaboration capabilities. He's one of only 70 in the world to receive an honor of PMI Fellow. He's the past president of Central Ohio PMI and was one of the founders of PMP Credentials. Lee has provided learning opportunity to more than 50,000 professionals in 23 countries. His book, Project Management, The Common Sense Approach, considered one of the best in the field. For today, as you may all be aware, we are going to have a very interesting discussion on strategic design and project delivery, bridging the gap. This webinar will examine the critical relationship between organizational strategy and the execution of projects. We'll also discuss the potential of maintaining strategy and project connection and the way to achieve and maintain that vital connection. If you have any question during the presentation, please type it in a Q&A section. I will try to bring them up during the presentation. Otherwise, we will have time for questions at the end. Mr. Lambert, welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hassan. That introduction was all truthful, I must say, but what it said to me, if I was listening to that from someone else, I'd say this guy must be old, and indeed I am. I've been with PMI now for 42 years, and in the project management arena for 53 years. Let me give you just a little background on this this particular webinar. First of all, the reason this webinar was given to 63 chapters, including yours. Yours is the last one. This is the final presentation of 2020 for me of this particular webinar. But I got it to 63 chapters and about 3,000 individual professionals. So the reason I chose this topic is when I went to the Global Congress a year ago in Philadelphia, our new CEO and president, Sunil Prashara, rolled out this idea of what he called the project economy. And he's been hyping that for ever since. And I think people are beginning to catch on to what he's talking about. I got it right away because here's what I saw. When he said project economy, to me, he basically confirmed something I've thought forever, and that is everything is a project. And therefore, everyone is a project manager. So the lessons that you learn in these webinars are applicable in almost any arena. We always have, quite a variation of responsibilities on the webinars, but what I'm going to say really applies to anyone that's involved in the project management arena. I'm going to use a couple of references to bring reality to it. I spent about over a decade with General Electric in my early career. And then I spent about 3 or 4 years teaching IBM professionals what it was going to take to earn their PMP. So I'm going to use those two and some specific examples, but generically you'll begin to see what I'm talking about. In 1981, a guy named Paul Dinsmore, who's also a PMI fellow, unfortunately passed away about a month and a half ago unexpectedly. But at the time in 81, we became fast friends. And one of the reasons we did is because he wrote a book called Managing Organizations by Project, which was basically a precursor to what we've now called the project economy. Well, the most important issue in the project economy relationship is that everything's linked together, that there's a strategic relationship for everything we're doing. So even if you're down at the low level working on a work package, you need to understand that there's a connection there between your work package and the strategy that's going to make your organization successful. Once we can come to that conclusion, then we have to realize, well, then we really need to watch carefully in terms of scheduling and cost, because whatever happens may ripple to the organizational hierarchy as well. So that's where we want to go with this. I think you'll have some fun with it. I believe wholeheartedly in it, but here's what I found recently when I talk to people who are involved in the project management arena, and I asked them if they could tell me what strategic objective their project supports. I'm sad to say that over 60% said, no, I don't. I just know I need to get it done fast and cheap. And so we've got to start to realize that we've got to be aware, no matter where we are in the hierarchy, of what the strategy of the organization is. So we'll see if we can link that all up together for you. One of the things I have to point out in the beginning is that we're impacted in terms of strategic execution depending upon what methodology, what approach, what mindset, whatever you're calling it these days, we're going to use to get there. That has a big impact. If we're going to stay linked, we've got to have a methodology that enables us to do that easily. When I started in the business in 1967, I know some of you probably were not born yet, but we had projects that were what we call the traditional, or sometimes we call it the old way. Is basically said that when I get a project assigned to me, I'm going to also get assigned to me a team of people to do that work. And those people stayed assigned to me throughout the life of the project, so we could really focus on what we had to deal with. Nothing was said about matrix management on projects at that point in time. Unfortunately, that now is our biggest issue, is that if we're going to try to execute a project in the environment of constant changing resource allocations, constantly changing skill set applications, it's going to make it all that much more difficult. But that's the way it is. It's matrix management, resource pools that are saved and loaned out to projects depending on need. Well, think about it. The need, determining who's going to get what resource, will be directly tied to how important your project is, meaning what strategic connection does it have. Now, as we went through the predictive methods, that's been around forever. The current PMBOK, which is edition 6, is 95% predictive, built around the old way. The new PMBOK, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks officially, is gone from 95% predictive to about 50%. So, and the reason for that is the advent of Agile and all of its related components to the world of IT. IT primarily is the big user of the Agile approach, but it gives us some flexibility in terms of rolling things out. In other words, instead of being tied to a 2-year plan to deliver a project at the end objective, we are now tied to evolving requirements definition. So these two components, Agile and predictive, are now combined in the edition 7, and that will become the basis for the PMP exam. And as one of the founders, which is probably my proudest achievement for PMI, as one of the founders of the PMP, this kind of stuff is important. And so we need to recognize, what does it take to be effective in connecting individual projects with organizational strategy. So in order to understand that, you got to understand what strategy is. It's not, I mean, it sounds easy when you say it fast, but it's not. People in the organizations always worry about what does that really mean? What is a strategy, and how is it relative to project management? Much of the training that I've done to these 50,000 plus individuals has been done without the coverage, or significant coverage at least, of the concept of strategy. So here's what it is, just in case you didn't know. Once a year, usually it's once a year, the high level people in the organization, the decision makers, the movers and shakers, the CEO, CIO, COO, CFO, all the C level, they go away, and their objective of that going away is to understand and create the objectives for success in the future. So the subsequent year is being planned at these sessions. Well, each one of these high-level decision makers, let's just call it the C level, each one of these high-level decision makers have their own projects that they feel are important to the success of the organization. And we know that we're going to end up with more strategic objectives than perhaps we can even support as an organization. So they create their strategic objectives. Once they get those objectives defined, then there's this, I'll call it waterfall, not the IT version of waterfall, but the rolling down of objectives to get down to the projects that need to be executed to achieve those objectives. So if I've got one strategic, let's say the strategic objective is something like improve market share, improve profitability, reduce costs. We can name a lot of them, but when we get that, then those strategic objectives will spawn or create, if you prefer that word, create projects that need to be executed in order to complete that strategic objective. So arbitrarily, let's just say that one strategic objective spawned 5 projects. Those 5 projects then are identified as contributors to the achievement of the strategic objectives. And so we have to look at those and decide how we're going to conduct those particular projects. Now, keep in mind, this is going on all the time in conflict with the other strategic objectives by the other C-level people. So they have the responsibility of ferreting all that out. What I'm interested in, what projects are we going to do to support that particular strategic objective? So it gets rolled down, and that becomes the strategy. Now, when we get our projects, at least according to PMI, we're going to get a project charter. And that charter gives us real basic information. That's the authorization document for any of us to proceed with the execution of a project. But sadly, one of the missing components, there are really 2 major missing components in the project charter. And the first one is the strategic objective that this project supports. In other words, I'm creating that linkage right up front. Here's your project, and oh, by the way, it supports strategic objective XYZ. So I look at all those and I identify what those are. That gives me the idea of how I proceed from there, from the very beginning. The second thing that's missing, I'll talk more about it a little bit later, is what's the priority of that project based on those strategic objectives. Because what we've learned in this environment of the matrix is that we're never going to have enough people to dedicate them to a project, so they are being shared among the projects with specific skill sets in order to create as many successful projects as possible. So the matrix has driven us into this idea: I need to have a lot more information than I'm currently being given in order to do that. Well, what that means is you got to ask questions. My guidance to the project people that I've had the pleasure of helping them improve their performance has a basic rule: ask questions. Keep asking questions until someone asks you to stop asking questions. Now you know you're on the right track, because if they don't know, that means you're not going to know. That means impact on your project. So you have a relationship to maintain, and you have an obligation to establish the linkage between your project and the strategic project. Now, most people don't want to fool with that. Most people, when I talk to them, they say, we don't really get involved in strategy. We just execute projects, scope, time, cost, get her done. And so you have to be aware that this is a new issue that I'm raising, and making sure that you don't start a project till you know why you're doing it. What I try to tell people is that we don't do projects for the heck of it. We don't do projects for the fun of it. We do projects to support strategic objectives. Now we're just taking a step to more tightly link the projects. Now, one of the things you got to be aware of is most of us, and I was guilty of this. I spent 18 years in the working world, just like a lot of you are, and I must admit that I didn't really think about these things that we're talking about now. And like most projects, I just stick my head in the sand and go as fast and as hard as I can. I didn't want to be bothered by the facts that this project, while you're doing it better, faster, cheaper, it no longer adds value to the strategic achievement. So what I'm going to ask you to do is pull your head out. Pull your head out and pay attention to what's going on around you, because it's going to have a particularly significant role, not only in the judgment of your success as a project manager, but in order to keep the project organization going, in order to fund more projects. It's a continuous cycle. And so I want to pull your head out and pay attention. Now, we are limited in this one. What we'd like to do is have what strategic objective does the project support? And then the second missing element is prioritization. Now, why do we have to prioritize? Because we have all of our resources located in resource pools, engineers, chemists, you name it. They're in a skill set pool that gets loaned out to projects by the owner or the manager of that resource pool. Well, what we know to be true, and you can argue with me if you want, but you'll lose, is that we always have more projects than we have people. There's no question about that. It's always the way it is. Well, the only way we can deal with that is there's two ways really. We can try to do all the projects with the resources we have, which ultimately ends up in delivering a lot of late projects because we're not getting 100% commitment of the individual resource. We can do it that way, or we can prioritize the projects and only plan to do the ones that I have enough resources to support. So that way we draw a line. Above the line gets people and projects go on. Below the line is not started, is waited until something makes people available. So we can't do all the projects all the time. Well, I learned this at GE. Now, GE is a fantastic training grounds for project managers. I was there for about 11 years, and that's where I really cut my teeth on this whole business, dealing with a $300 million component of what was then called the fast breeder reactor. And so I learned everything about project management in that real world. Well, so I was getting ready to leave GE. I was kind of enticed away by a national laboratory. And what I found was that in order to prioritize, somebody has to make decisions. Well, GE knew I was leaving. They were sad, but they understood. And it was for more money. I'm going to be honest with you. I love GE, but they weren't paying me very well. So I went and moved for more money. And before I left, the GE CEO called me into this division called the Breeder Reactor Division. And he said, before you leave, we'd like you to review our projects for next year and give us any insights you think might be helpful. I thought that was very nice of him to ask. I felt good about that. So I went in and got to sit down with a group of people that had made those decisions, and they handed me a document. Now, back in those days, everything that anybody thought was important was called mission critical. So they give me this document with all these mission critical projects on it. Okay. First thing I see is they've done a pretty decent job of defining the scope and requirements. They've done some work on assigning budget and or time, so that it looked pretty good. I went through all 25, and actually, I was impressed. Now maybe that's because I taught them all that. I don't know, but the fact of the matter is, they had a great list prepared. They had 25 mission critical projects. 25. Now, so when I got done reading it, I said, this looks good, but I didn't see any prioritization. So I said, I assume that the priority is the order in which you've documented these projects. And they said, no, that's not true at all. They said that project priority is on another page. And so I asked to see that other page, and I looked at it, and here's what I found: 25 priority one projects. everyone was given top priority. Now I don't know how you do that, and they didn't either, but they were trying to dog the fact that they had to tell people what the priority was. So I got a little bit upset. I sent them away. I said, this is ridiculous. Why would you even involve me in such a sham? And I said, when you get it right, you can call me. I'll come back and give you my insights. So about a week later, I get a call and I go in and I look at the list again, and I could see that they had changed the order. I remembered the first several projects, and I could see they were shifted all around. So that encouraged me. So I said, okay, this good. Yeah, okay. Where's that prioritization list? So they gave me the list. And here's GE. Really, they get it. They're a smart company. Here's what they did. Project number one was priority number one. Project number two was priority 1A and 1B and 1C on down the line. Hadn't done a darn thing. And so what we did is I got them to really think about this. And when we were all done, we ended up drawing a line between 11 and 12. Now they had 25. We draw a line between 11 and 12. And what I told them was, these are the 11 projects that you can execute to the schedule you wish with the people you have. If you start to take on more projects, you got to either get more people or change out a project that's above the line on 11. So that means that out of 25 strategically important projects, only 11 of them are going to get done. That caused some thinking. That caused some conversation, heated at times, but they started to really understand what prioritization is. Now, here's why you want to know for sure, because the priority of your project it empowers you to have an impact on what resources you get. So in other words, if your project is priority one, you can be pretty confident you're going to get whatever you need to get that project done. But if it's down at 10 or 11, that might not be true. So you want to know, because what I see this prioritization as empowerment. I'm being empowered by the reality that my project is a very high priority. So we need to make sure that we understand that. If you ask the question of management, typically here's the answer. If you ask the question, what priority is my project? And they'll say, well, it's number one. It's really important that it gets done. So then I reverse the question. I say, okay, well, what would happen if it doesn't get done? And now you put prioritization in a different slant. Instead of asking, like, assuming you will get done, let's say, what's the impact if we don't? So these conversations need to be effective. There's a couple books out on critical conversations. This is one of them. So priority. Think priority. Okay. If you're going to be able to get it done and support the strategic objectives, you got to know what priority you have. And maybe we only get 3 of the 5 projects in a particular strategic objective portfolio. We only get 3 of them done. Well, then we can assess what the impact on the organization is of not getting those other 2 projects done. Project management is a thinking process. It's not a follow the tools. It's not a play with the tools. It's a thinking process. Use that mental capacity that you have to anticipate cause and effect relationships. Now, so what I'm shooting for, and this has been my objective for the last couple of years actually, is to get organizations to understand, to effectively use project management concepts and techniques, we need to have an integrated information system. Okay, some people call it an enterprise wide. Some people call it integrated logic. What I'm saying is all the projects need to be integrated from a planning and assessment standpoint. That takes a substantial capability in your software to take advantage of good project management planning and statusing. I need to have that information in a form and format that will enable me to do that. And so we want to look at what we can put in place that integrates. Now, when I say integrate, here's what I mean. I need all the projects linked. So if all the projects are linked, then any problem encountered on project A, the impact on project B and project E will be able to be determined. So I want to be able to link that together. In order to do that, there are 3 tools that you need to apply, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But first of all, let's just talk about the idea that I need this software. I need to be able to input information. Let's put it this way: input data and execute, and then take information system capabilities called decision support information as a result. Okay, so I call this a strategy office. I'll give you my IBM reference on this. I think it's important. In 1993, IBM replaced their CEO. Jack Akers was projecting an $8 billion, that's with a big B, loss for the coming year. And shareholders decided enough is enough. So they hired a new guy. That guy's name was Lou Gerstner. Now, he comes from American Express and before that, the petroleum industry, but he really didn't know that much about what we were doing. So when he got to the assignment, the first thing he did was he spent about 4 to 6 weeks out on the road talking to people about why are we projecting an $8 billion loss? What projects are we doing? And he had that conversation hundreds of times. Then he came back, called his management together, and gave them the result. Here's the result of my study. He said, we're doing too darn many things. We're spreading ourselves too thin. We got more projects than we could ever complete. We've lost our core principal values. So what I'm going to do is return us to our core competencies, and then we're going to recapture the shine on IBM. Well, in order to do that, he eliminated 60% of the projects. 60% of the projects that were in the plan for the coming year were deleted, and then focus on the remaining 40. Okay. In order to do that, he formed an organization called the IBM Project Management Center of Excellence. Now, everybody in the world is calling that a PMO now, but we didn't know what PMO was in 1993. And so we call it the Center of Excellence. And they created what it took, because he went on to say, and we're going to implement project management in IBM. And in order to do that, we're going to develop or buy or modify software to supply the decision support information we need to regain our competence. He assigned a young lady named Carol Wright to make that happen IBM wide. Okay. And Carol, had the pleasure of working with Carol for a couple of years before, unfortunately, she passed away due to a brain cancer problem. But during that time, I learned so much from her. She was incredible in terms of seeing beyond the day-to-day activities to where the integration of all these things would pay big dividends. Well, I think the history will support the fact that this may have been one of the biggest turnarounds and most effective turnarounds that we've ever witnessed. And I know clerical people who, because they were smart enough to hang on to the IBM stock during the hard times, are millionaires today. Okay, so it pays dividends, but we need the information system. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But if you don't have it, you need to get it. And you got to go into this understanding that what I'm looking for is not more information. I'm looking for the right information, the information that allows me to make better project management decisions in support of the strategic objective. Well, what that says is, if you think about it, if you go by my everyone is a project manager theory, then everybody's a stakeholder. What we need to do, though, is to categorize these stakeholders based on the kind of information they need or want in whatever hierarchical organization they report to. So if I look at the top of this slide, where you can't see anything, but I know it's there, is called the control stakeholders. There's not that many. There's a few. They usually are signatory on the project charter, but even if they're not, they can have the ability to stop or start your project. So if they have that ability, I've just called them control stakeholders. Now, we don't want to inundate them with information. We just want to give them what they want to be comfortable that the projects are moving in the direction we thought they would. Okay, so it's a high level, but yet it's a subordinate issue to have all the working level rolled up into some high level information. Okay, that's level one. Level two is the one that's pictured here on this slide, and that's everybody that's working on the project by definition is a project stakeholder. I call this level influence or impact. So the work that they're doing will either have an influence on or an impact on the outcome of our project. So everybody on the project team is a stakeholder of impact or influence status. Okay, but there are more stakeholders than that. Those resource pool owners, engineers, chemists, and so on, they, by definition of providing resources, giving or taking away, they become influence or impact stakeholders as well. So now we've grown that to where we can say, look, if Bob decides he's going to pull 2 subject matter experts off my job and replace them with 2 interns, then I can analyze the cause and effect and see what that does to the strategic objectives. Very important. All of this shows up in your communications plan. Those of you who passed the exam, and I'm guessing there's probably quite a few that did or a lot that are going to, we really need to understand the importance of a communications plan. And there's a whole chapter on communication in the PMBOK. So those stakeholders are vital. Okay. Now there's a third level again that doesn't show up here, but it's one that you better be aware of. This is called an information stakeholder. This is someone that's not working on your project, but they're interested in what's going on your project. Now you say, well, why would they be interested in not working on it? Well, they know they've got a project similar to yours coming up. They know that they can learn from the experiences that you have and not have to wait till we complete a closeout report. So they're interested in information that will help them and therefore the organization do a better job in project management. Now I'm going to give you a simple example here to make the point. It's an $11 billion example. Okay, in 1990, actually 88, it started. I was hired to run a turnaround project. In other words, this was a medical diagnostics company wholly owned by the Engelhorn family in Mannheim, Germany, but they're housed in Indianapolis, and that particular product was their main component of revenue. Okay, so they brought me in to manage a turnaround project, which was to create a product better by a long shot than the competition, that gave you information faster and was priced at a very effective, attractive price point. Well, they started to do the project and quickly realized they didn't have a project manager. They didn't have anybody that really even knew how to spell project management. So they hired me to come over and run the project. So that was the beginning of something really big. So I started to form my team. Now, there's a matrix environment, so I'm going to have to borrow my resources from those that are available within the organization. So when I get all done, I've got 25 chemists. This is a chemistry project. It's for in-home use for diabetics reading their blood glucose levels. And it's primarily a chemistry project. So I got 25 chemists, and I left 75 functional chemists in their home. Okay. And so when we finally started the project, when I got the WBS and loaded people on, I immediately started to hear of complaints in the functional chemistry group. People going like, well, I don't know why Lee chose Bob. I'm way better than Bob. I've been here longer than Bob, and it was going to have an impact on the project. You can't have that kind of stuff going on and not impact the project. So I thought I better head this off. So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Every Friday, for the next 4 Fridays, every Friday afternoon, I want my chemists, 25 of them, to get together with the organization's functional chemists and just exchange information. No objective, no agenda, just exchange information about what you're doing, what's working, what isn't working, and enable them to grow with each other. Okay. Well, at the end of 4 weeks, it went very well. They were happy with that. But at the end of 4 weeks, it was time to really focus on the project. So they went back to their functional home, and my people started to work diligently on the project. Well, to make a long story short, they got 3 years worth of project work done in 18 months. And delivered a new product to the marketplace. This new product was so substantially improved that it captured massive amounts of market share, took market share away from our competitors, and everything looked amazing. In fact, this project's actually been written up by PMI, called the Miracle Project, in the September 2001 edition of the PEMNet. I believe that's correct reference. It's been written up. No one thought we could do it. Okay, so that was exciting. But then the fact of the matter is, after 3 years in the marketplace with this new product, Behringer Mannheim was acquired by Roche Laboratories. Now, Roche is a huge, internationally known, and they purchased this company from the Engelhorn family. Now, at the time of the purchase, this was a $1 billion company. Okay, it was capitalized at about $1 billion. So they paid a $10 billion premium to get that product under the auspices of Roche Labs. Okay, well, the story goes that it's their most profitable project today, as we speak today, and its residual market share is such that it generates massive amounts of profit. Now, the reason I tell you this story is not to say how good we are at getting those projects done, but it's to make the point to you that we maintained that kind of capability because we utilized all the stakeholders, including the information stakeholders. And I didn't tell anybody this for a long time because I didn't want to admit that we couldn't get her done. But the fact of the matter is, my 25 chemists, handpicked by me, were not able to solve the problem. But the functional chemists, when we called upon them, quickly came up with a solution that was very viable and very doable. So, in retrospect, you see, had we not included the information stakeholders in our process, that company would not exist today. But instead, Roche Labs is cranking out these products as fast as you can buy them. This is a very critical story. These stakeholders are the answer to success. So when you create your communications plan, you're going to structure it around the stakeholder environment, and you're going to identify what they need to get in the way of information, when they need to get it, what form and format are you going to provide it, so that they can then readily make decisions about the work that they're doing. So stakeholder analysis, it's huge. People have been trying to get PMI to add a separate section on stakeholder management. That's not been done yet. And with the combination of predictive and agile, I suspect it won't be done for a while. But it's something to think about. Think about when you go back to your work. Look at your stakeholder study. Look at who you've identified, what their needs are, because you're going to be called upon. And that's why meetings go long, by the way, is they come to these meetings hoping to gather a lot of new information. Well, let's make sure they have it before the meeting so we don't have to waste people's time. In order to do that, of course, I mentioned tools. You got to have tools. Well, this is good news, bad news. Good news is we got so darn many tools now, and they're coming at us new ones every month, it seems. We got so darn many tools now that it can provide those kinds of information easily. Okay, that's the good news. The bad news is we got too many tools. It's taken we spend more time supporting the tools than we do managing the projects. So what I've come to as the conclusion that I need to focus my attention on specific tools. And so I'm going to give you the three that I think if you just use these three, you've increased your probability of success by 60 or 70%. Okay. So pay attention. The first tool is the WBS. Now, I mentioned to you how important the WBS is. Remember, it's a hierarchical decomposition of the work content. Once I get to the work package level, that's where all the action is. That's where I define skill set requirements. That's where I determine cost to support those skill sets. That's where I get estimates of time. Those three things are critical to the success, and I can get all of those by utilizing the WBS. I know a lot of you confuse the BS with another term, but this is breakdown structure, okay? And so we want to break the work down, okay? That's number one. Second tool is a critical path schedule. Now this was invented, if you will, created, if you will, back in the 50s by a consulting firm, Booz Allen Hamilton, and unfortunately, it's not used to the extent that it should be. But I say to my people who do project management for me, you better have a critical path schedule. You better have a CPM schedule available. Now, PMI has chosen the format of precedent diagramming, which is the same thing but just a different format. One uses nodes to connect the work, and the other uses the lines as work and the nodes to just show flow. So we want to look at that and say, okay, so when I go to somebody and say, you got a critical path schedule, and they say, oh yeah, we do. And I say, can I see it? And they bring me a Microsoft bar chart schedule. That's not a critical path schedule. I need to be able to relate relationships uh, systematically depending on what connects to what. I can analyze cause and effect of slippage on one work package to slippage on another work package, even in another project. So that's what we mentioned earlier. We got to have that integrated data set. So I have those two. Okay. Now there's plenty of programs around that'll give you critical path schedule capability. Unfortunately, they're abused, and they're actually used in some organizations, uh, and it deflates the project manager because he's spending too much time managing the schedule and not managing the project. Okay. Now the third one is not really, I don't know, I call it a tool. Some people don't like to call it a tool, but in my view it is, and that's the risk management process. Okay. To me, in project management, the only thing that I can do that really proves that I'm dealing with an integrated data set is when I identify a risk and I try to quantify the probability and the impact. I can now plug that information into my critical path schedule and immediately see what the impact is. In other words, even if it's a high probability, if it's low impact, I can deal with it one way. But if it's high probability and low impact, I can deal with it one way. But if it's high probability, high impact, I'm going to have to make some decisions on what needs to be done. You aren't just data providers. You are decision makers, and you need to make the decisions that impact your project most effectively. Now, in order to try to make my point, uh, I've left one tool out of the toolbox, and it's one of the tools that unfortunately aren't really used that much anymore. But I read a whole book about this, so I know it's important, and that's common sense. Common sense has to be applied to all the data. In other words, if I don't apply common sense, all I got's a bunch of data. So we got to make sure we use what's available, we use what adds value, we leave what doesn't aside. So tools become vital to the lifeblood. Now, I just want to recap one thing. I posted this on LinkedIn about a week ago, uh, to sort of make the point that waterfall is on its way out. We so far have had about 29,000 views and not as many comments, but a lot of comments saying, "Yeah, but we still do some waterfall." You'll always still do some waterfall. You're going to have waterfall zealots who don't want to fool around with agile. Don't be smoking with that agile stuff. Give me that waterfall project, and I'll knock it out for you. So we see a lot of organizations maintaining a capability to do waterfall. You can tell if you walk into an organization, on the right-hand side, you see a bullpen with a couple of desks and 2 or 3 people standing in it. You know right away that's the waterfall. And the way you really know is if they're old and they have long hair, that means they're waterfall people that don't want to convert. On the left-hand side of the room, you see that massive bullpen arrangement. These are all the agile people. These are all the people that are dealing with Scrum and sprints and all those kinds of terms and terminology and retrospectives, and they put fancy names for things we've been doing in project management for years. Retrospective is closeout, is a learning curve. So we need to make sure we understand. There'll always be some waterfall. That's why the new PMBOK is 50% predictive and 50% agile hybrid. Well, when you see the word hybrid, that means there's probably some waterfall capacity built into the project. Okay. So in reality, what we find is that we're spending most of our time in the agile world, especially if you're IT. Now, the agile zealots, once you see something you like, you suddenly find yourself becoming a zealot. They think that agile applies to everything. They basically say, throw all that other stuff away. Agile will get it done for you. Well, that's just really not true in my mind. Now, if you can prove it, then try to do that. Many have tried and many have failed. But the thing about it is that you can't. I don't see the ability to use agile as a methodology or as a mindset on a road construction project, on a building construction project, any of those kinds of projects that require planning, total project planning is not going to benefit as much from agile as it does from predictive methods. Okay, so I give people that advice, but the agile train is on the track, and man, it's coming right at you. So you need to understand it. I get calls all the time from PMPs who say, "Wow, have I wasted my effort to get a PMP? It's not going to be usable anymore. We're shifting everything to agile," which in agile, the scrum master is sort of the equivalent of a PM in a dedicated or predictive project. So, and my advice to them is, yes, keep your PMP, but just to be safe, to buy some insurance, go ahead and attempt to get your scrum master certification. Now you got both sides covered. Not that complicated. In fact, it's so simplistic. I think, my opinion, is that the people who wrote the manifesto back in 2001 in Snowbird Ski Resort in Utah really patterned it after a sporting event called rugby. Rugby is the same thing. Both the teams get together. They're holding on to each other. They're pushing. They're shoving for position, and then finally the scrum master throws the requirements ball into the middle of it. And as a scrum, they begin to bite and kick and scratch and try to get their hands on the requirements ball. And so pretty soon it squirts out of the scrum. Someone runs as fast as they can, picks it up, and then repeats the process until they complete what it is they're trying to get done. So in reality, uh, agile is just another form of rugby. So keep that in mind. It's not brain surgery. I have grown into uh, a supporter of agile in terms of its elaborating requirements definition because of the problems we encountered when we tried to run a project from start to finish based on the initially provided requirements. So give it a chance, give it a try. A lot of people are going to be moving to the Scrum Master role as opposed to the idea of a PM. Now, when you fool around with this and you become aware of the benefits of this idea of strategic linkage, you'll become very excited about it. You'll become enthusiastic about it. You see the benefits of it. The problem is management doesn't always see that. Management has a different set of objectives they're working to, and unless you can begin to show them how that will benefit them, they won't be willing to shall we say, pony up the budget to purchase what we need to do that job. So your job is to sell them. I created a career as a project management salesman. That's a project management title I should have had. From 1973 on, I should have been called the project management chief salesman, project management. Get your management to support the opportunity of implementing this capability. You're gonna what it's gonna do is create the illusion of intelligence. You're gonna look smart if you have that kind of information available to you. Okay, this is my last slide, and then we'll open it up to questions. This is a I mean, it's obviously for joking purposes, but not really, because I know two PM professionals that I consider to be outstanding project managers, both PMPs, who've fallen into a trap when it comes to strategy. Their idea of a successful project is one that delivered scope, time, cost as planned. Management's idea of a successful project is one that when the completion of that effort took place, we were able to link it to the strategic objectives and know that it's going to support them. As we execute a project and changes start to take place, there's a possibility of moving away from the support of strategic objectives. This leads to no good. Well, two of these guys, one of them in particular, took his project. He got called in. He took his project in to the CEO, and the CEO said, "How'd the project go?" He got all excited and provided the detail. And then the CEO said to him, "That's great," but he said the strategic objective that spawned that project is no longer valid. So you've wasted a lot of effort getting that done in time to support our organization when it doesn't. So he said, "I just want to let you know that's not good. It's not good at all. But I'm going to give you another chance to go through this project process and stay linked to the strategic objectives." Well, he was very thankful for that. And so I said, "Hey, he means it. He means it. Don't fool around." So he went to do another project, and I'll be darned if he didn't do the same thing. Disconnected from strategic objectives, got the project done, delivered a high quality product, and was fired. Was fired by the CEO for disregarding his urging to stay linked to the project strategy. And if you're not linked, better tell somebody. So that's the idea behind this. I mean, what I've given you in 1 hour discussion probably took me to learn years of dealing with project management, years of looking for the right information system. So you're not going to walk away from this program and be highly successful right away. You've just got to begin to implement your projects, constantly maintaining the connection to the gap relative to the strategic objectives. Okay, that's all I've got formally. I'm sure we may have some questions. Every group does, and this is the last group, so let me hear them. What do you got?
Well, thank you, Lee, for the great presentation and very valuable information. So we have a few questions from our audience, if you allow me, please.
Sure.
We have a few questions. So first question says, how can we ensure that our projects and programs aligned with the organization's strategy?
Well, am I coming through sound-wise?
So how can we ensure that our projects, programs aligned with the organization's strategy?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
All right, sorry, I thought it went dead all of a sudden. Well, it's kind of what I mentioned early on. When you get a project, no matter how big or small the project appears to be, the very first question you need to ask is, what strategic objectives does this project support? In other words, what will I do with this project that will enhance the ability to complete the strategic objectives? And you need to make that assessment. Anytime you do a project report, you need to reconfirm what the strategic objective is. And if it's changed, you've got to reevaluate your project to support that. So it really, To me, you own it. You own the project. You know what the scope of the project is, and you just need to be sure that you've maintained the linkage. Now, the problem with this is change control. If you want to get into that idea, and that is that they're in today's current projects, the senior level decision makers are changing objectives faster than you can blink an eye. And so, if you don't keep track of that, if you don't maintain that linkage, you're going to look like this guy. You're going to deliver a great project that has no useful role in the strategy of the project.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question says, from your experience, what is the reason behind that most organizations fail to execute their strategy effectively, even though they can execute their projects smoothly?
I think mainly at the C level, if I can talk to C level, the problem we have with the C level is that every one of those strategic managers, if you will, has their own personal strategy that they think is the most important in the organization. So you constantly see pushing and shoving and posturing for a way to get my projects done. And when you do that, that results in a constant liquidity of the strategy planning. So we need to make sure that those people at that level, when they decide they're going to make a change, that they know what impact it has on the projects. You're not going to stop this. I got bad news for you. It's not going to stop. So what I learned when I was in project management doing them, what I learned was I'm not going to stop change. It's just not going to happen. But what I want to be able to do is assess the impact of change and then act accordingly.
Thank you. Another question says, what can you tell us about like the impact of COVID-19 on project management?
Well, I think the jury's still out. I have some personal thoughts. I think that the true professional, the COVID-19 impact, if they've been forced to work at home, is an increase in productivity. I'll be honest. I think I personally, I think I would see project people working longer hours, dedicating more time, because you know what? They got nothing else to do. I mean, why not just work while you're there? So I think productivity was going to increase. Now, that can be negated if the senior level people, who many of them think they have to go into the office, is still operating in a constant change mode. But technically speaking, I think it's impacted. Now, here, let me tell you why I think. We did a calculation in U.S. that says it costs about $38,000 to maintain the facilities and support of an individual in an organization. So if I'm working from home, there's a $38,000 savings right there for the organization. So if I can, in fact, you can see Microsoft now is giving their people the option of working from home. Some people can't do it. I'm not sure if I would have been effective doing that or not. I'm not sure I would have stayed focused. But generally speaking, I think there's a high probability of increased productivity. Initially, it's decreased because it's something new we have to deal with. But on the long term, like we are in now, everybody I talk to on LinkedIn agrees with me. They find themselves working longer hours than they did when they went to work. In fact, some of them are saying, I wish I could go back to work and relax a little bit. So I think it's a positive thing, to tell you the truth.
Thank you. Okay, another question says, if I'm a project manager and all of my time I'm spending with a stakeholder and their issues, so is that can be considered like a wasting of time, and the effort I'm doing should be, I should dedicate that effort to the project itself, not wasting the time with the stakeholders?
Yeah,
Can you comment on
that's an
that?
awesome question. That's a question that I've really seen in my career that's got an easy answer. Here's my answer. The definition of a project manager, one of the reasons I got into project management in the first place, is project managers don't do work. They get work done through others. That's the key. The only way you can increase your value to the organization is get lots of work done. Well, I can't do that if I'm doing work. I mean, I'm only capable of doing the work of one. If I can marshal the troops all the stakeholders and get them all enthused and motivated, I'm now delivering 8 times as much work by one person. So project managers don't do work, they get work done. So the answer is yes, keep working with them. Keep working with them because that's how your project's going to be successful. And at the end of the day, you'll be recognized. You don't want to be recognized as a worker. You want to be recognized as a project manager who got things done.
True. Yeah. Thank you. So some companies have started adopting agile project management methodologies. Okay. So how would this methodology affect the organization strategy and strategic initiatives?
Well, it impacts it in several ways, but two ways are the resources. Do you have the right resources to do Agile? You can't just put out a memo and say, we're doing Agile now. You got to have the right resources. So what this ends up causing is the hiring of new or different people to support that process. That's one. Two is you have to, you as an owner, if you will, you have to recognize that it takes time. One of the things that all the Agile people I talk to emphasize is patience. You have to have patience because this is new, it's different, and you have to allow it to mature to the effect that it's going to get things done. I don't think you'll ever stop doing predictive projects, but from an Agile perspective, this is a major strategic decision. It requires a whole different set of software in many cases. So there's a lot of upfront investment in order to convert to an Agile approach. And you got to be sure your project portfolio supports an Agile application. So if your portfolio is an oil field structure or a road project in a ring road process, those aren't Agile projects. So they have to be wise enough to understand. And I think what happens with what I call flavor of the day is that we hear war stories by people who say, wow, this is unbelievable how much time it's saved now. Well, that's fine, except doesn't mean that's what's going to happen for you. So you got to be willing to be patient.
Thank you. Well, we have several questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So I appreciate if someone have like if you can post your questions on our social media accounts on LinkedIn or Twitter.
Yeah, look at my LinkedIn profile and go ahead and send it to me. I'll get back to you.
Definitely, we'll be more than happy to get back to our audience as soon as possible. So at the end, I would like to thank you, Lee, for this wonderful presentation and interesting discussion. And I would like to thank our audience for joining us today as well. Thanks again, and see you next time. Have a wonderful evening.
Take care. You do the same. Appreciate it.